History likes to pretend that wars are fought for noble reasons, like freedom, justice, or survival. But if you look closely, many of the deadliest conflicts on Earth began with something far smaller and far more human. A wounded ego, a public insult, a ruler who could not tolerate being disrespected, a moment where pride mattered more than peace. These are the wars that started not because they had to, but because someone's honor felt threatened. And once the first blow was struck, millions paid the price. Human pride has always been a dangerous force, especially when combined with absolute power. Kings and emperors did not just rule land and people, they ruled reputations. Their authority depended on being feared, admired, and never openly challenged. An insult was not just personal, it was political. To ignore it was to appear weak, and weakness invited rebellion. In many cases, rulers believed that going to war was safer than letting their pride be questioned. One of the earliest recorded examples comes from ancient Greece, where pride and honor were woven deeply into culture. The Trojan War, whether mythologized or rooted in historical conflict, is remembered as a war sparked by insult. A Trojan prince abducted or seduced the wife of a Greek king, and that humiliation demanded revenge. What followed was not a small border dispute, but a decade-long war that destroyed cities and wiped out generations of warriors. Even in legend, the lesson is clear. Ego escalated a personal grievance into total war. Centuries later, Alexander the Great demonstrated how pride could both build and destroy empires. Alexander saw himself not merely as a king, but as a figure destined for greatness. When Persian rulers dismissed him as a minor threat, the insult fueled his ambition. Each victory fed his ego further, pushing him deeper into conquest. While Alexander's wars reshaped the ancient world, they also left countless dead and unstable regions behind. Pride turned a defensive campaign into an unstoppable march of destruction. The Roman Republic and later the Roman Empire were especially vulnerable to wars born of insult. Roman leaders competed fiercely for glory, and reputation mattered as much as victory itself. Generals provoked wars simply to enhance their prestige. Julius Caesar's conquest of Gaul was not strictly necessary for Rome's security, but it elevated his status beyond that of his rivals. His pride and ambition destabilized the Republic, leading to civil war. Millions suffered because political ego became inseparable from military action. In medieval Europe, pride-driven wars were often cloaked in claims of divine right. Kings believed their authority was granted by God, making any challenge feel like sacrilege. When rival monarchs questioned titles or lineage, wars erupted. The 100 Years' War between England and France was fueled by competing claims to the throne. But beneath the legal arguments lay wounded pride on both sides. Neither king could accept being seen as lesser. The result was more than a century of warfare that devastated entire regions and populations. Sometimes, wars began over insults so trivial they seem absurd by modern standards. In the late medieval period, disputes over ceremonial precedence, seating arrangements, or diplomatic slights could escalate into armed conflict. These symbolic gestures mattered deeply in royal culture. Being placed lower at a banquet or addressed incorrectly was interpreted as an attack on sovereignty. Pride demanded response, and response often meant war. In early modern Europe, royal ego became even more dangerous as armies grew larger and deadlier. Kings no longer fought alongside small bands of knights. They commanded massive standing armies capable of devastating entire countries. A personal insult between rulers now had global consequences. Wars of succession, fueled by ego and personal rivalry, dragged multiple nations into conflict. Millions of soldiers and civilians died because monarchs refused to back down. The Napoleonic Wars offer a powerful example of pride transforming Europe into a battlefield. Napoleon Bonaparte was driven by a deep belief in his own destiny. Every insult, every challenge from rival monarchs reinforced his determination to dominate the continent. His refusal to accept limits led to endless wars that reshaped borders and killed millions. Napoleon's pride created both his rise and his downfall, leaving Europe exhausted and scarred. Pride-based wars were not limited to Europe. In imperial China, dynastic rulers often launched massive campaigns to punish perceived disrespect from neighboring states. Tribute systems were built on recognition of superiority. When smaller kingdoms resisted or insulted the emperor's authority, wars followed. These conflicts were less about territory and more about reaffirming dominance. Entire populations suffered to preserve imperial ego. In feudal Japan, pride and honor were inseparable from warfare. Samurai culture revolved around reputation, loyalty, and respect. Insults between clans demanded response, often escalating into prolonged conflict. Daimyo went to war not only to expand territory, but to restore honor. These wars devastated regions and prolonged instability for centuries, showing how ego-driven violence can become normalized within a culture. Colonial expansion also involved wars sparked by insult and pride. European powers reacted aggressively to challenges from indigenous rulers who refused submission. Resistance was framed as disrespect. Pride justified conquest. Empires destroyed civilizations not only for resources, but to prove superiority. Millions died as ego-driven domination became policy. World War I stands as one of the clearest modern examples of war born from pride and insult. The assassination of an archduke was a spark, but the explosion came from wounded national egos. Alliances were activated not because war was inevitable, but because backing down was seen as humiliation. Leaders believed that showing strength mattered more than preventing catastrophe. Pride turned a regional crisis into a global slaughter. Even after the horrors of the 20th century, pride continued to fuel conflict. Political leaders repeatedly chose escalation over compromise to avoid appearing weak. Insults exchanged through speeches, propaganda, and diplomacy hardened positions. Wars became contests of ego as much as strategy, and civilians paid the price. What makes pride-based wars especially tragic is how preventable they often are. Unlike wars fought for survival, these conflicts begin with choices. A ruler could apologize, a diplomat could compromise, a nation could accept symbolic loss, but pride blocks these paths. Ego whispers that backing down is worse than bloodshed. History shows that once pride takes control, logic follows behind. Leaders convince themselves that war is inevitable, even when it is not. They surround themselves with advisors who reinforce their ego. Opposing voices are silenced. The road to war becomes one-directional, driven by emotion rather than necessity. Millions of deaths across history can be traced back to moments where leaders refused to swallow their pride. Cities burned because of insult exchanged in letters. Armies marched because of wounded egos. Entire generations suffered because one ruler could not accept being disrespected. These wars leave behind more than graves. They reshape borders, cultures, and identities. Hatreds born from pride-based conflicts linger for centuries. The original insult may be forgotten, but the consequences remain. Children inherit grudges they never chose, all because ego once mattered more than peace. The greatest irony is that pride-based wars rarely achieve their original goal. Rulers seeking respect often lose everything. Empires collapse, dynasties end. Names become associated not with glory, but with destruction. History does not reward pride, it records its cost. Understanding these wars forces us to confront an uncomfortable truth about human nature. Technology changes, weapons evolve, societies advance, but ego remains constant. As long as pride governs power, the risk of unnecessary war remains. History is not just a record of battles and dates, it is a mirror. And in that mirror, we see that some of the deadliest wars were not inevitable tragedies, but avoidable disasters born from pride, insults, and wounded egos. When leaders chose honor over humanity, millions died to protect feelings that history ultimately forgot. The lesson is brutal and simple. When pride rules, reason retreats, and when reason retreats, war follows.